Sister Agnes had always been a woman of unshakable faith. Her days were spent in prayer, her nights in contemplation. A devout servant of Christ, she lived in the quiet solitude of St. Helena's Convent, an ancient stone monastery perched on a misty hillside. Life was simple, rhythmic, a cycle of devotion uninterrupted by the noise of the outside world. But everything changed on the night of her death. It happened suddenly. A sharp pain in her chest. The world blurred, darkened. The last thing she saw before everything turned black was the worn wooden crucifix above her bed. For precisely 15 minutes, Sister Agnes was dead. When she awoke, the convent was in chaos. A group of fellow nuns had gathered around her lifeless body, whispering prayers, eyes wide with disbelief. The doctor, who had pronounced her dead, stood frozen, his instrument still clutched in his shaking hands. But Sister Agnes did not rise as she had been before. Her breath was ragged, her eyes distant, as if she had seen something no mortal was meant to see. And she had. In those 15 minutes beyond life, she had ventured to a place she could not name, where light and shadow twisted together in unnatural harmony. Time had no meaning there. The air hummed with voices, yet no lips moved. And at the heart of it all, she had encountered it. The serpent. Not as it had been painted in sacred texts. Not as the deceiver, the corrupter, the bringer of sin. No, what she saw defied every lesson she had been taught. The serpent did not slither. It did not hiss with malice. It did not wear the mask of evil. Instead, it stood before her, neither beast nor man, a being of unspeakable brilliance. Its form shimmered, indistinct yet powerful, a presence that radiated knowledge. And then it spoke. "Did you think you knew the truth?" Its voice was not a whisper of temptation, but a solemn echo that resonated in her very soul. It was not the voice of a deceiver, but of a guardian, a witness to something far older than humanity itself. Sister Agnes trembled. Who are you?" A pause. Then, the being spoke again, and its words shattered everything she believed. "I am not your enemy. I never was." The visions that followed were unlike anything she had ever imagined. The garden, pristine and untouched. The tree, its branches laden with fruit that pulsed with a divine glow. And Adam and Eve, not as sinners, not as fallen creatures, but as prisoners of ignorance. The serpent had not tricked them, it had freed them. A flood of understanding overwhelmed her, shaking the foundations of her faith. The words of Genesis twisted in her mind, rearranging themselves into something entirely new. What if the first sin was not disobedience but the refusal to remain blind? What if the true deceiver had been the one who demanded silence, not the one who offered knowledge? Sister Agnes wanted to scream, to reject what she was seeing, but the visions would not stop. They poured into her like a revelation too powerful to contain, filling her with a truth that had been buried for millennia. And then, darkness. She awoke gasping, her heart pounding like the tolling of a great bell. The nuns surrounded her, faces pale, eyes wide. Someone whispered, "A miracle." But Sister Agnes knew better. This was not a miracle. This was a burden. She had seen what was not meant to be seen, and now she had to decide. Would she speak the truth, or would she bury it, just as it had been buried before? Sister Agnes could barely breathe as she sat upright in her bed, the room spinning around her. She felt the weight of something ancient pressing against her chest, as though the very air carried the burden of the revelation she had received. The other nuns knelt around her, whispering prayers of gratitude, weeping for what they believed to be a miracle. But Sister Agnes knew better. This was no divine intervention. This was something else, something dangerous. Mother Superior Maria was the first to speak. "Sister Agnes, you were dead. We saw it. And yet, here you are." Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath her words. "I saw something," Agnes murmured, gripping the sheets. "Something I was never meant to see." The room fell into silence. Even the candlelight seemed to dim. Mother Superior stepped closer. "What did you see, child?" Agnes opened her mouth, but hesitation clamped her throat shut. Could she say it? Should she? To reveal the truth meant to unravel everything, to unmake centuries of doctrine, to challenge the very foundations of faith itself. But the memory of the serpent's voice burned in her mind. "I am not your enemy. I never was." She took a trembling breath. The serpent of Eden was not who we think. Gasps filled the room. Some nuns made the sign of the cross. Others exchanged fearful glances. "Blasphemy," whispered Sister Eleanor, an elder nun known for her strict adherence to Scripture. The serpent was the deceiver, the bringer of sin. Agnes shook her head. "No, that is the lie." She recounted her vision, her voice growing stronger with each word. She spoke of the garden, of Adam and Eve not as transgressors, but as beings trapped in ignorance. She described the serpent not as the embodiment of evil, but as a liberator, a bringer of knowledge. The tree, it was not a curse, it was a gift, she continued. And God— She hesitated, fear clawing at her throat. God did not want them to eat because he wanted them to remain blind. A horrified murmur spread through the group. "Enough!" Mother Superior Maria's voice was sharp, her face pale. "Do you realize what you are saying? This is heresy." Agnes met her gaze, her own eyes burning with the weight of what she had seen. "Is it heresy, if it is the truth?" A tense silence followed. Finally, Mother Superior exhaled sharply. "We must speak with Father Gabriel. He will know what to do." The very idea sent a chill down Agnes's spine. Father Gabriel was not just the priest of St. Helena's convent. He was a man of rigid doctrine, of unwavering faith in the Church's teachings. If he learned of what she had seen, what she now believed, he would brand her a heretic without hesitation, and she knew what happened to heretics. She had to leave. That night, while the convent was asleep, Sister Agnes packed what little she could. Her rosary, a small loaf of bread, a flask of water. She wrapped herself in her habit and stepped out into the cold, moonlit corridor. Each footstep echoed in her ears. Each breath felt like a betrayal. As she reached the heavy wooden doors of the convent, a voice stopped her. "You are making a grave mistake." She turned sharply. Mother Superior Maria stood in the shadows, watching her with sorrowful eyes. "If you leave now, you may never return." Agnes swallowed hard. "I cannot stay. Not if staying means silence." Maria hesitated, then sighed. "Then go, child, and may God have mercy on your soul." Agnes nodded, tears stinging her eyes, and stepped out into the night. As she disappeared into the darkness, she did not yet know where her journey would take her. But she did know one thing. She would not be silenced. The night air was sharp against Sister Agnes's face as she hurried down the winding path away from St. Helena's convent. Each step felt like a deeper descent into the unknown. Her entire life, her faith, her purpose, had been built upon a foundation that now crumbled beneath her. She had to find answers. But where? She traveled for days, moving from village to village, speaking in hushed tones to scholars and priests, searching for someone who would listen. Some dismissed her immediately, horrified by her words. Others called her a lunatic, a woman touched by madness. But a few, just a few, listened with wide, fearful eyes, as though she had spoken a truth they had always suspected but never dared to voice. And then, in the ruins of an ancient monastery long abandoned by the Church, she found him. Father Lucian. He was an old priest, a man once respected by Rome but cast out for his dangerous ideas. When Agnes told him her story, he did not scoff. He did not call her mad. He simply nodded as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "You are not the first to see beyond the veil," he said, leading her deeper into the monastery's shadowed halls. "But those who do rarely live long enough to speak of it." Agnes felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Then why tell me this?" "Because," Lucian said, pulling an ancient, dust-covered tome from the shelf. It is time for the truth to be known. The book was unlike any scripture she had ever seen. The words were written in a language long forgotten, yet as she traced her fingers across the page, she understood. And what she read confirmed her worst fears. The serpent had not been the enemy. It had been the first rebel, the first to challenge the order imposed upon humanity. The true deceiver had been the one who forbade knowledge, who demanded obedience without question. The punishment of Adam and Eve had not been justice, it had been control. They twisted the story, Lucian whispered. For centuries they erased the truth, turning the liberator into the villain. Agnes's hands trembled. Then, who is God? Lucian looked at her with sorrowful eyes. That, my child, is the question that has cost many their lives. A sudden noise shattered the silence. Voices, footsteps, the flicker of torches against stone. They found us, Lucian hissed. Before Agnes could react, the doors burst open. A group of men in dark robes stormed in, priests of the Inquisition, their faces hardened by conviction. At their lead stood Father Gabriel. You should have stayed silent, sister, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Agnes's pulse pounded in her ears. The truth cannot be silenced. Gabriel sighed. The truth is whatever the church declares it to be. He nodded to his men. Take them. Lucian stepped forward, but before he could act, a blade found his chest. He crumpled to the floor, his blood staining the sacred texts he had spent his life protecting. Agnes screamed. She tried to run, but rough hands seized her, dragging her from the monastery into the cold night. She was bound, thrown into a cart. The road beneath her blurred as they took her back to where it all began. St. Helena's convent. Days later, she stood before a tribunal of priests, her wrists raw from iron shackles. The charge was read aloud. Heresy, blasphemy, apostasy. Her punishment was death. Yet as they led her to the pyre, as the flames licked at her feet, she did not cry out. She did not beg for mercy, because she knew. Even as the fire consumed her, even as the smoke rose to the heavens, the truth had already been set free, and no fire could ever burn it away.